Do you like sewing? Do you like reading about sewing? I've got 10 of my favourite books. Keep watching. Hi, my name's Sam. Welcome to my channel Frugalisama, where I talk about all things sewing, specifically dressmaking. And today is day 33 of 100 days of sewing. And today I'm just going to give you 10 of my favourite fiction books which are about sewing. But first of all, I'd just like to say thank you to everyone who's subscribed so far. If you wouldn't mind clicking the subscription button and the notification bell, that will tell you when I have new videos out. In general, I'm recording during the week as part of the 100 Days of Sewing series. The 100 Days of Sewing series is essentially showing people how accessible sewing can be, whether that is because you're sewing on a budget or whether you're new to sewing and you want to learn some new skills. Today's video is about fiction books which have sewing as a theme, and that is following on from my video the other week about losing your SewJo, where I mentioned that I like to read about sewing. So I thought I'd give you 10 books that I've really enjoyed. None of them are in any particular order. There's no countdown. Insert countdown music. A lot of them I have borrowed from a local library, so I can't actually show you them all in booktube manner. But if I've got the book with me, then I will just show you a picture. Otherwise I'll just insert a picture of the cover so you can see what I'm talking about. I do find some of the covers are a little bit dated, but I wouldn't let that put you off. For me, I've enjoyed the stories. There's no psychological thrillers amongst them. They're all sort of fairly easy to read, but generally historical fiction with a bit of romance thrown in. So I'll start with the one that I read a number of years ago, and that is the Aloha Quilt, which is by Jennifer Chiaverini. Sorry if I've mispronounced that. I read this a long time ago, and I think my mum's friend lent me it because she is a quilter, and it is obviously by the title. It is based around quilting. The author writes a lot of books about quilting and does the Elm Creek series, but this is just like part of that series, I believe. I was able to read this as a one-off without knowing any of the characters previously. But it has stuck with me because it was very evocative of Hawaii. I'll give you a brief rundown of the story. Unsurprisingly, it's set in Hawaii. The main character is going through a divorce and decides to go to the island of Maui, I think you pronounce it, to set up a quilting retreat. And it's just the friends that she makes over there, and there's a bit of a love interest in there as well. I do recall that there's some quite detailed information about the quilt, and it sort of conjured up some really good pictures. I think that this particular author is very good at, even from myself, not a non-quilter, of building up a picture of what each quilt block looks like. So yeah, essentially it's a book about friendships and relationships, and the culture of Hawaii is thrown in as well, which I didn't know a great deal about. That one I could definitely recommend. So on to my next one. Last year, Sarah Lawson of Sew Sweetness ran a book club. I think it was the beginning of last year, in which she had 7 books that she recommended, and then there was a free pattern alongside 6 of them, and a little video following that with a discussion with a friend about the books. Of the 7 books, I read 6 of them. Well, the one that I didn't read, it was just simply I couldn't get hold of it. I think most of them I did borrow from the library. And out of the 6 patterns that she provided with that, I made 4 of the patterns as well. So I will show you, as I'm talking about the books, the patterns that I made as well. And I will also link below the link to Sarah's website, where it links to the individual videos and the patterns as well. So the first one is The Sewing Machine by Natalie Fergie, and unsurprisingly, it's about a sewing machine. It spans a couple of generations and therefore a few timelines, and I think a few people might have found that a little bit off-putting, but I was able to keep up with it. Essentially, it takes you, it's the backdrop of the Singer sewing machine factory, where the sewing machine was originally manufactured, and the lady that actually made this particular sewing machine follows a bit of her life, and then it goes on to a young chap called Fred, not Thread, who inherits the sewing machine in about 2016, which belonged to his grandma. He ends up taking up sewing. I think he was in a bit of a bad place in his life, and meets somebody who is also connected with a sewing machine, without giving too much of the story away. This is a book that I recommend to anybody. It gives you a bit of social history around the Singer sewing machine factory, the strike that went on there, a little bit of Scottish history as well. So the story follows the sewing machine from its production over a span of about 100 years. Where it's eventually restored by Fred and the 3 or 4 owners that had it over the course of the sewing machine's life. So it's not telling the story of the sewing machine's life, it's the lives of the people that owned it. There's a bit of sadness in there, a bit of insight into social class at the time. One of the owners actually makes notes of everything that she sews, and this is what Fred finds when he's clearing out his grandparents' flat. This was a debut novel by Natalie Fergie, and I think it was really well written and really well researched, and I believe it was crowdfunded to come into publication as well, which is really interesting. The pattern that Sarah provided alongside the book was the Clydebank tote, which I made in a Burberry wool, which I had given. So that's the bag. So you've just got a little zip that goes across it. There's an interior zip as well. I'm not sure if that's part of the pattern or something that I did. And I also made a little pocket for my phone. I'll be honest, I've never actually used this. Burberry print's not my thing. But the bag shape and the bag itself is really good, and there's very little hardware in it, so there's just the zip really. The only difficult thing is pulling it through these. You have to pull through these. If you are making it, just be careful of what fabric you do it in, so that it's easy to pull through. The next book in the Sew Sweetness book club was The Last Runaway by Tracy Chevalier, and Tracy Chevalier was the author who wrote The Girl with the Pearl Earring. That's another historical fiction going a bit further back, going back to the 1850s, following a girl who travels from Bristol, I believe, over to Faithwell in Ohio, and apparently at that time Ohio was at a crossroads between people travelling west, and so you've got your pioneers travelling west and slaves travelling north towards Canada. So The Last Runaway is a reference to the slave trade and a runaway slave. And another really interesting one, Grace can come across as a bit pious. I think, you know, there's a stark contrast between the English and the Americans. But it's quite a sad story. Grace got jilted and decided to up sticks and follow her sister across the seas, and tragedy struck and she ended up having to stay with strangers. So there's some really strong characters within it. Grace herself was quite a strong character. She meets a milliner called Beth, who helps with the runaways from the slave trade. And her brother is quite a character as well, who's a slave catcher. I think that's how they refer to him. So yeah, there's some likeable characters in there. Really interesting part of history for me that I knew nothing about. And the pattern for that was the Faithwell storage bin, of which I made 3. There was 3 sizes. And I made all 3 of them. So the inspiration behind the Faithwell storage bin is the hat boxes used in the milliners, and this is the biggest one, which I made out of an African wax print. So you can see it's circular in shape. You've got the one handle there, and it's just open at the top, and they're just storage bins. I think this is the biggest size. I made all 3 sizes, and again, very little hardware. The accompanying video explains it really well, and you can see I keep wool in here, and yeah, really handy storage bins actually. That you know, depending on your fabric choice, you know, you can match with your own decor or whatever. So yeah, I really enjoyed that book. it kept me gripped. It was interesting looking at some of the reviews going back to it, because obviously I can't remember every detail, and how some people sort of said it was the best historical fiction they'd ever read, and other people were pointing out some of the weaknesses in it. But yeah, I enjoyed it. The next one was Mademoiselle Chanel by C.W. Gartner, so no surprises about what this one's about. But it is fiction. It's a fictionalised version of Gabrielle Chanel's life. So there are elements of truth in it. I sort of did have a look only on Wikipedia afterwards. Strangely enough, despite the fact that Chanel is one of the most iconic people in fashion, I knew very little about her life actually, so it was really interesting. But obviously you've got to take it with a pinch of salt, because obviously the author has put words into her mouth, if you like, or words and thoughts into her mouth. It was told from Chanel's point of view, so it's her speaking within it. But yeah, she had an interesting life, and I really did enjoy it. So she was brought up in an orphanage. That's where she learned how to sew. Then it takes you through some interesting times that she had until she got to Paris, let's say, and then I think she was accused of collaborating with the Germans at some point as well. So it's like a part of it is based on historical facts, in that some of the people that she met, some of the things that are recorded in fiction. So it takes you from her birth right through the First World War and the Second World War, through to her final show, which was about 1954, I think it was, which was a comeback fashion show. So it does take you all throughout that. And what a maverick she was as well. You know, we're talking about a time when women didn't wear trousers. She brought that in. I mean, where would we be without trousers? Women wearing trousers, really. So yeah, she really did buck the trend. And you know, women wearing much more comfortable and casual clothes as well. I think we've got Chanel to thank for that one as well, because before that, in the Edwardian times, we were all, you know, trussed up in corsets and stays and what have you. I do remember when reading it thinking, wow, what a woman. She might not have made all the best decisions all of the time, but she was a businesswoman, I think, through to the end. I don't think there was a pattern released relating to this one, because like I said before, there were 7 books and only 6 patterns, and I don't think any of the patterns actually tied in with that particular book. So the next book on the reading list was The Gown by Jennifer Robson. So this is one book that I did actually buy. The gown refers to the Queen Elizabeth's wedding gown. So it starts with Anne, who has her first job working at Norman Hartnell, who designed the gown, just as a young girl, who befriends a French Jewish girl called Miriam, and they make close contact, end up living together, sharing a house together, and working together on the gown. So then you fast forward to Canada, to Heather, who inherits some embroideries from her Nan, and goes, at the time when Nan dies, she has just been made redundant, so decides to go back to England to try and discover where these embroideries came from. And she uncovers a little bit of a secret that a part of her life that Nan never talked about, gets to find out about the gown, the embroideries rather. And yeah, it was a really interesting book. There was quite a lot of fine detail about the sewing in it, and the touches on the Holocaust as well, because obviously one of the characters is Jewish, and that's the period. So yeah, it really evokes the hardships that people suffered in post-war Britain and France, but it has a little bit of a romantic interest as well. So the pattern that was released for that particular one was the Windsor pouch. Oops. So this is my variation of it. The original has a lace zip at the top. I omitted that because I wanted to make a version for my husband for his insulin pouch, and I didn't think he'd want lace on the top. So this was the test one to see if I could do it without the lace zip. And then I made it smaller for him, and I keep my knitting in here, my knitting projects in here. So you can see it's full of little knitting bits and pieces. Nice and spacious. You can get a project in here, a small project like a hat or socks or whatever. So the next book was The Silk Weaver. It's a dual title, and I think it was The Silk Weaver in the UK and The Hidden Thread elsewhere. And the author is Liz Chanel. And more historical fiction. This is going back to the 1760s. It follows a young girl, Anna, whose mum has died. Dad's a country vicar. She gets sent to London in the hopes of marrying well, and she ends up fainting and being sort of rescued, if you like, by a young French silk weaver called Henri. So it covers the silk riots, which I knew nothing about. But essentially the silk riots were the weavers rioting against the big mercers importing cheap silk. I think that's right. The main character, Anna, was based on a real life person, Anna Maria Garthwaite, and she was a textile artist renowned for her floral designs. So that part of history is woven in throughout the book. The silk riots are also woven in throughout the book. Apparently they didn't actually happen at the same time, so that was your artistic license, if you like. But yeah, it gives you a good background of the social snobberies of the time, the sort of prejudice and what have you. And yeah, there's a good storyline going throughout it. I enjoyed the book because it tackled quite a lot of topics. So you've got your racism, the wage riots, the class, religion, lots of detail of how the fabric was produced. I really enjoyed that during that period. The Suffolk coin purse was the pattern that was released for that particular one, and that's not something that I chose to make simply because I didn't have the hardware for it. You needed a little purse frame for it, so I'll insert a picture for that as well. So another Liz Chanel book that I've recently read but wasn't part of the book club is The Forgotten Seamstress, and this was quite a sad tale really. Going back to the beginning of before the First World War, where young Maria, who's an orphan I believe, a talented seamstress, goes to her first job as a seamstress at Buckingham Palace, where she attracts the attention of the Prince of Wales, as was at the time, not our Prince of Wales. I think that would have been, would it been Edward, as in Edward and Mrs Simpson, I think. What happens to her is quite shocking really by today's standard. It does give you an insight of how how psychiatric patients were treated at that time as well. So I don't want to give too much away, so I'm trying to be a bit coy, but just to give you a background about when it's set in the story of it. So you've got this Forgotten Seamstress herself. You don't actually get to meet. Her story is related through a sociology student who is interviewing her, and the notes that were taken throughout, the notes and the cassettes that were taken while she was spending time on a psychiatric ward. The solace that Maria had was making a quilt from some of the fabrics that she liberated, shall we say, from the palace. The quilt's then discovered by Caroline in her mum's attic, and Caroline is struggling with her mum's early dementia. And yeah, it's a good story. Another one with a bit of historical fiction and a bit of romantic interest in it as well. And there's quite a lot of detail about how the quilt was made as well. So there's quilting and garment making in this, but the garment making is not very detailed. So it's an interesting historical novel with a mystery at its heart. So that's the summary of that one. Some interesting information about the May silks as well, which was sewn into the quilt. The May silks are the part of the wedding dress for the Queen's mum. So you've got two wedding dresses involved in these books. The last book that was part of the So Sweetness book club was The Quilter's Apprentice, and that was again by Jennifer Chiavarini. So this is the first in the Elm Creek series. follows Sarah, whose husband was unable to find a job, so they move towns, so she gives up her own job and finds it really difficult to find a new job in the new town, so ends up working for the woman who her husband's a gardener, a landscaper I think, and he's working on an estate, and she ends up working for the woman who runs the big house. It's quite good really, because you don't automatically warm to the lady who, or I didn't anyway, who runs the big house. I think she's called Sylvia, who runs the house. You don't automatically warm to her immediately. She's a bit grouchy and she's a bit, you know, not particularly likeable. But as the story runs through, you get to know the characters, and yeah, it's a really nice, heartwarming story. So Sarah makes friends with other people in the town, joins a quilting guild, and then discovers that one of the members of the quilting guild is actually associated to Sylvia at Elm Creek also. So it's the story behind that really. Really interesting. Again, she draws some really good pictures of how particular quilt designs are put together, and some really good historical information about different quilting techniques too. Really enjoyed it. As a non-quilter myself, I still enjoyed it, and I would definitely read more of this as well. They're just cosy books. There's nothing controversial going on there, and you can visualise the blocks that the author is actually describing. I'm not sure whether the pattern that was released for that was the Tower crossbody bag, or if it was for the book that I didn't read, which I'll insert the name because I can't remember. It's Margaret Goes Forth or something. So I'm not sure whether the next thing that I'm going to show you is associated with that, but I just thought I'd show you because it's a part of the series. And that's the Tower crossbody bag. And so you've got your long crossover strap. So there's a bit more hardware in this involved. So you've got a buckle there and a slider there, zip across the top. And then you've got a zipped pocket on the inside and a zip pocket on the outside as well. And it fits loads in, does this. I mean, it's not a massive bag. It's a real, you might be able to see it's a little bit grubby. I've used it quite a lot. Great little bag, nice little detail there with this bit here. And you can do it one solid. I decided to do it two separate. There's patterns for both. And the other pattern that I haven't mentioned that I didn't make was the persimmon dumpling pouch, I think it's called. I'll insert a picture of that whilst I'm talking, and that comes in 3 sizes. Like I say, I've not made that. That's just a little sort of makeup bag. And yes, I think the persimmon makeup pouch will be associated with the Quilter's Apprentice because it's quilted. And I think that bag will be for the book that I haven't read. Number 9 on my list is The Red Ribbon by Lucy Adlington, and Lucy Adlington is a fashion historian who I've spoken about before. I've attended quite a few of her presentations. She's a really funny woman, but this isn't a funny book. It's set around the Holocaust. So it is actually a young adult book, but it doesn't come across as being a young adult book to me anyway. Perhaps it sort of skirts around some of the more horrific parts of the Holocaust and sticks with the story rather than the horrific things that were going on. But it follows Ella, who gets snatched from the streets essentially and ends up in what is essentially Birkenau, but I think she refers to it as Birchwood, which is the English translation of what Birkenau was. She meets her friend Rose, who's a different class to her, very sort of bit of a daydreamer, but positive attitude. They get each other through the horrors of what Auschwitz was, or Birkenau was. They both get taken in the upper tailoring room, which were essentially making clothing for officers' wives and the elite. So there is quite a lot of sewing in it, and it is quite interesting from that point of view, from my point of view. But yeah, they become really good friends, inseparable, and Yes, it goes through the choices that they have to make as inmates, and how it kind of hardens you as well as form good friendships as well. Obviously they're hoping for liberation throughout it, and that's quite heartbreaking. And it's maybe the ending of it is the young adult bit, because it's obviously, I'm not going to give it away, but it's maybe a bit softened by that. So it's hard to say that it's an enjoyable read, although it's fiction. It is based on fact. There really was a contingent of women who worked in this sewing for the commandant and his wife and the officers and what have you, while the ovens were burning. It was eye-opening, but it's not something to shy away from, really. I mean, it's the more you learn about it, the more we can prevent it in future, shall we say. So on to the last book that I want to talk to you about today, and that's Seamstress by Maria Duenas. Still haven't finished this. I'm on to my last 100 pages. I was hoping to finish this before I did this review. I've got to the point where I don't want to rush it, because I want to I'm enjoying it that much. I don't want to rush it, so I wanted to get this video out. I've read 500 of the 600 pages, so I think you can pretty much guarantee that I like it. I would describe this book as Gone with the Wind, but set in Spain. In that your main character, Sierra, is just a survivor. She reinvents herself. It's set against the backdrop of the Spanish Civil War and the Second World War, although she's not actually in the country at the time. So it's the bits that you hear about the Spanish Civil War are actually through family and friends. So I don't want to give too much away about it, but essentially Sierra learns to sew at her mother's knee, if you like. Her mum was a seamstress who worked for a fashion house. So there's lots of descriptions of garments and garment sewing in this, much more than some of the others. She's about to marry a fairly conventional man, and then she meets a bit of a cad who dumps her, leaves her destitute and pregnant. It takes you through the Spanish Civil War, Second World War. Her mum's stranded in Spain, and she travels through Europe during the Second World War, picking up the pieces and reinventing herself. Yeah, definitely would recommend this one. Really enjoying it. It's got to go back to the library next week, so I need to finish it. But like I say, I'm savouring it. I'm not going to rush it. So that's it. 10 books, all based around sewing, which I particularly enjoyed. None of them are particularly taxing. They're just ones that I've enjoyed. They've all got sewing at the heart. They're all historic. So if you like historical fiction and you like a bit of romance in there as well, don't be put off by some of the covers. They are some of them are a little bit dated. I would say that is quite a dated cover. So yeah, I really enjoy these sorts of books. They give me an insight into periods of history that I don't particularly know a lot about. Usually strong women characters, and yeah, you get a bit of historical insight. I have read other books, but I just wanted to keep it to 10. But if you've got any that you can recommend, leave me a comment below, and maybe we can put another one like this together. So I will give you a quick flash of the books that I've recently got from the library. And you've got a mixture here of these are memoirs. That's the Sewing Circles of a Rat, Secrets of the Sewing Bee. Looks like it's set during the Second World War. This is another young adult one. I'm not so sure whether I will read that or not, but inside it, interestingly, it has little patterns throughout it. So like a pattern for a book bag. I think there's bunting. There's all sorts interspersed. So if you're trying to encourage somebody to read and or sew, if you're looking after children or grandchildren, that might be a nice one to read together, or to encourage somebody. And then technique books. So there's a Merchants and Mills one there. I'm glad I didn't buy it. Pattern cutting primer, which is going to be really interesting. Interestingly enough, my local library's got this Kenneth King one. Again, pay no attention to the very dated cover. Some really good techniques in here. So it's 2009 is this book. So yeah, that cover looks a bit dated. a nice Kenneth himself there. And he has a crafts class, probably more than one, but the one that I've done is the copy your own jeans. Very, very good teacher. So some good techniques in there. And things like Bag Making Bible by Lisa Lamb. I've got, my library's got all of Debbie Shaw's books, or most of Debbie Shaw's books in. So I just put sewing in the search bar, and this is what it brought me, and I've just reserved them all. So lots to go through, not all fiction. So I might come back and review some of these books as well, if that would be of interest. Okay, right, I'm going to go now. Let me know below if you've got any favourite books that are related around sewing, and I will speak to you later. Bye.